She submitted fake payabs claiming she made $15,000 a month. She had $250,000 in assets during bankruptcy. And now she's facing over $3 million in new tax liens with a husband she married without a prenup. Teresa Giudice went from reality TV queen to federal inmate. And what I'm about to reveal shows she still hasn't learned her lesson. September 2001, Teresa Giudice applied for a $120,500 mortgage loan. On the application, she claimed she worked as an executive assistant making a substantial salary. She submitted W-2 forms proving her income. She attached payabs showing her earnings. There was just one problem. It was all fake. Teresa wasn't employed anywhere. The W-2 forms were fabricated. The payabs were forged. She lied to a bank to get money she couldn't afford to borrow. But that was just the beginning. July 2005, Teresa applied for an even bigger mortgage, $361,250. This time she claimed to be a realtor making $15,000 per month. That's $180,000 a year. Again, completely false. Teresa was unemployed. She had no real estate license. She had no income whatsoever. But she submitted fake documents anyway and got the loan. For 7 years, from 2001 to 2008, Teresa and her husband Joe Giudice repeatedly submitted fraudulent loan applications. They got mortgages. They obtained construction loans. Banks gave them approximately $5 million based on lies. That's $5 million they borrowed by lying about their jobs, their income, and their finances. But the fraud didn't stop there. In October 2009, the Giudices filed for bankruptcy. They claimed they owed more than $10 million in debts. On television, Teresa told The View that Joe's tenants in his 4 apartment buildings couldn't pay rent during the economic downturn. She said he was caught up in lawsuits regarding properties. She made it sound like they were victims of bad circumstances. But federal prosecutors saw something very different. When you file for bankruptcy, you're required to disclose all your assets, everything you own, every source of income, any businesses you operate. The Giudices were supposed to be honest with the bankruptcy trustee so their debts could be properly managed. Instead, they lied. They failed to report $250,000 in assets, $250,000 they just didn't mention. They concealed 3 vehicles. They hid a boat. They owned properties that housed a pizza restaurant, but didn't disclose them. Teresa had an online boutique called TG Fabulicious. She never claimed ownership of it in the bankruptcy paperwork. Joe owned a business called 1601 Maple Avenue Associates LLC. He kept that secret too. Even worse, they hid the fact that Season 2 of Real Housewives of New Jersey was about to air. That meant Teresa was about to make significant money from the show. Bravo pays housewives hundreds of thousands per season. Teresa knew that income was coming but chose not to tell the bankruptcy court about it. Joe also had a separate tax problem. From 2004 to 2008, he never filed tax returns. Not once in 4 years. During that time, he earned nearly $1 million. He just didn't bother reporting it to the IRS. No tax returns filed, no taxes paid. Teresa and Joe were charged in a 39-count indictment. The charges included conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud, bank fraud, making false statements on loan applications, bankruptcy fraud. Joe was additionally charged with failure to file tax returns. Each charge carried serious prison time. Some counts had maximum penalties of 30 years in prison and $1 million fines. Teresa's attorney immediately proclaimed her innocence. Teresa issued a statement saying she supported Joe as a wonderful husband and father. She claimed she was committed to her family and intended to maintain their lives. She was hopeful they'd resolve it quickly with the government. But the evidence was overwhelming. Federal prosecutors had documentation proving every lie. They had the fake W-2 forms Teresa submitted. They had the fraudulent payabs. They had records showing she wasn't employed when she claimed to be making thousands monthly. They had bankruptcy documents showing what the Giudices disclosed versus what they actually owned. U.S. Attorney Paul J. Fishman stated Teresa and Joseph Giudice used deception and fraud to cheat banks, bankruptcy court, and the IRS. The evidence was so strong that fighting the charges would have been pointless. March 4, 2014. Teresa and Joe pleaded guilty before U.S. District Judge Esther Salas. They each admitted to conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud. They pleaded guilty to bankruptcy fraud by concealment of assets. They admitted bankruptcy fraud by false oaths. They confessed to bankruptcy fraud by false declarations. Joe additionally pleaded guilty to failure to file a tax return. They stood in federal court and admitted they'd been lying for years. U.S. Attorney Fishman said with their guilty pleas, they admitted the schemes with which they were charged. Having now confessed their wrongdoing, the Giudices face the real cost of their criminal conduct. October 2014, sentencing day. Judge Salas had a difficult decision. Teresa had 4 young daughters at home. Joe also needed to be there for his kids. The judge couldn't send both parents to prison simultaneously, so she structured their sentences to be served separately. Teresa was sentenced to 15 months in federal prison. Joe received 41 months. They would serve their time one after the other. But here's where it got interesting. Judge Salas almost gave Teresa probation instead of prison. She considered letting Teresa avoid jail time altogether. What changed her mind? Teresa's behavior during the case. According to reports, Teresa offended the court with her attitude and lack of genuine remorse. The judge felt Teresa wasn't taking her crimes seriously enough. So instead of probation, Teresa got 15 months behind bars. January 5, 2015, Teresa reported to the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut. The same prison that inspired Orange is the New Black. She was inmate 657-0350. Her days of designer clothes, luxury cars, and lavish parties were replaced with early wake-ups, work assignments, and prison food. Teresa's daily routine was strictly controlled. She couldn't film for Real Housewives. She had limited contact with her daughters. She could write letters and make phone calls on a schedule. The glamorous life she'd built on television was completely gone. While Teresa was locked up, Joe stayed home with their 4 daughters. December 23, 2015. Teresa was released after serving 11 months of her 15-month sentence. She got out early for good behavior. She returned home just in time for Christmas. Her daughters were overjoyed. Fans welcomed her back, and Bravo immediately put her back on Real Housewives of New Jersey. But her legal troubles weren't over. She still faced 2 years of supervised release. She had to check in regularly with a probation officer. She had to follow strict financial reporting rules. She couldn't get into any more trouble, or she'd go right back to prison. March 23, 2016. Now it was Joe's turn. He reported to Fort Dix Federal Correctional Institution in New Jersey to begin his 41-month sentence. Family attorney James Leonard Jr. told E! News that Joe's brother-sister, several family members, and Teresa were present when he surrendered. It was obviously very emotional. Teresa had just gotten out and now her husband was going in. The couple would be separated for over 3 years. But an even bigger problem was looming. Joe Giudice was born in Italy. He came to the United States when he was 1 year old. He'd lived in America his entire life, but he never became a U.S. citizen. He remained an Italian citizen. That became a huge problem when he was convicted of federal crimes. October 2018, an immigration judge ordered Joe to be deported to Italy. ICE released a statement. Mr. Giudice was ordered removed by an immigration judge with the Executive Office for Immigration Review. Mr. Giudice has reserved his right to appeal the decision. Joe's lawyers immediately filed appeals. They argued he'd been in America since he was a baby. His wife was here. His 4 daughters were American citizens. His entire life was in New Jersey. Deporting him would destroy his family. But the government didn't care. Joe was a convicted felon and not a U.S. citizen. That meant deportation. March 14, 2019, Joe completed his 41-month prison sentence. Most people would celebrate finally being free. Not Joe. He was transferred directly from prison to an immigration detention center in western Pennsylvania. He wasn't going home. He was being held by ICE while his deportation appeals continued. The legal battle dragged on for months. Joe sat in detention while lawyers fought to keep him in America. Teresa visited him, but their marriage was crumbling under the pressure. October 2019, Joe made a decision. Rather than sit in immigration detention indefinitely waiting for appeals, he voluntarily flew to Italy. He would wait there for a final decision on his case. April 2020, Joe's third and final appeal was denied. He would never be allowed to return to the United States. His wife was in New Jersey. His 4 daughters were in New Jersey. His entire life had been in New Jersey. But he was permanently banned from entering America. December 2019, Teresa and Joe announced their separation. They'd been married for 20 years. They had 4 children together. Their divorce was finalized. Teresa was officially single. Joe remained in Italy, trying to maintain relationships with his daughters through video calls and occasional visits when they could travel to see him. But what about Teresa? Did she learn from federal prison? Did spending 11 months behind bars teach her to follow the law and pay her taxes properly? Apparently not. In October 2023, Teresa made headlines again for unpaid taxes. She owed over $1 million to the state of New Jersey. Where did she get the money to make that payment? According to reports, her new husband, Luis Ruelas, took out a $1 million loan. He borrowed $1 million to pay Teresa's tax debt and their mortgage on the $3.40 $4 million mansion they purchased in 2021, August 2022. Teresa married Luis Louis Rules in a lavish ceremony. It was her second marriage. Luis had been married before, too, and brought 2 sons into their blended family. Together with Teresa's 4 daughters, they created a family of 6 children. But here's the shocking part. Teresa and Luis did not sign a prenuptial agreement. During a February 2022 appearance on Watch What Happens Live, Teresa admitted, I would if he said so. I'm so very easy about that. He definitely has more than me. I would never take anything from him. I'm so not like that. Attorneys and financial experts were shocked. Teresa had just gone through a devastating divorce where financial issues destroyed everything. She'd served federal prison time for financial fraud. She owed over $1 million in back taxes, and she married a new man without any legal protection. Without a prenup, they were 50/50 partners in everything, assets and debts. March 6, 2025, court documents revealed Luis Ruelas over $2.5 million in unpaid taxes. A tax lien was filed against him. March 20, 2025. Just 2 weeks later, another tax lien, this time against Teresa. She owed $303.89 to 1/20 to the state. Together, Teresa and Luis owed nearly $3 million in unpaid taxes. And that's just to New Jersey. December 2024. Another tax lien had been filed against Luis. Attorney Adam Michael Saxes told the U.S. Sun, if they divorce with no prenup, it would be a mess. Husband and wife are 50/50 partners. If you have a debt, that could be half yours and half his. Marilyn Chinitz, a matrimonial lawyer, told OK Magazine, one would hope that after her 2014 tax liability conviction, Teresa would have avoided further federal or state tax issues. It is not clear whether or not her new tax issues stem from her prior legal challenges. But what is clear is that as a married couple, if the parties jointly filed their returns, Teresa may have liability for the tax lien associated with her husband. Think about that. Legal experts are saying Teresa could go back to prison if these tax liens represent new offenses rather than old debts. She's a convicted felon who served time for financial fraud. If she's committed new tax violations, the government won't be lenient. They'll throw the book at her. In mid-2025, during a live TV interview, Teresa was asked about the tax debt. She abruptly ended the conversation. She refused to discuss it. The video went viral. Fans were furious. How could she still not take financial responsibilities seriously after everything she'd been through? Teresa served 11 months in federal prison. Her husband was deported. Her marriage ended. Her daughters grew up with both parents behind bars. She lost years of her life to fraud convictions. And here she is again facing massive tax debts and refusing to address them publicly. In November 2024, Luis Rules requested an extension for repayment of a $1 million loan he'd taken out in 2023, the same loan he'd used to pay Teresa's previous tax debt. He also requested an additional $250,000. The total loan would now be $125 million, and he must pay it back by March 2026. So, Luis borrowed $1 million to pay Teresa's old taxes. Now, he owes that million plus interest. Meanwhile, they have new tax liens totaling nearly $3 million. Where's the money going to come from? Teresa makes money from Real Housewives of New Jersey. She gets paid for cameo videos. She launched a lipstick line. She has a podcast called Turning the Tables by Teresa Giudice. But is that enough to pay off $3 million in tax liens plus a $125 million loan? Bravo hasn't confirmed whether Teresa will return for season 15 of RHONJ. The show is currently on pause amid cast conflicts and declining ratings. If Teresa loses her Bravo paycheck, her financial situation becomes even more desperate. At 52 years old, Teresa Giudice has spent over a decade dealing with legal and financial disasters. She went from living in a 10,000-foot mansion to federal prison. She lost her first husband to deportation. She married a new man without a prenup who now owes $2.5 million in taxes. She faces the